Peace. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Welcome, of course. And I'm going to jump right into it. This session or this insight, I want to kind of dive into the concept of divine timing, or most importantly, just timing and trusting in divine timing. I want to explore a little bit with you message to the Black man. And not just that specifically, that work by Elijah Muhammad, but uh, just some of the other gems he shared, and in particular about the mother plane, and the rise of original people, and of course, everything that we pivot on and we share on is, it's rooted in the ANU way. And in the ANU way, we're taught the way of spiritual sovereignty, of law. And most importantly, and as it relates to this session of divine calibration, and that becomes so important because it makes everything else a whole lot easier, when you're calibrated with the divine, and you're not necessarily um, moving so much on your own thought or own instinct, and there's a something, I would say with that we can all reflect on. And sometimes we have to ask ourselves, are we moving on time or are we just moving, you know? And in a society that sometimes locks us into this kind of automaton sort of reality, it's very easy to get caught up in just moving, but not being locked into the divine timing. So, for starters, I know it's been some time. Let me say that, we're using the word time. It's been some time since I've shared an insight with you all, and it wasn't time to speak. I pulled uh, to the side. I'm gonna say pull back, but I pulled to the side for a moment. It wasn't time to speak, and now it is time to speak. I'm always moving by spirit and not by an algorithm's clock, or, by the suggestions. I know I'm probably one of the more inconsistent podcasters. And I mean, I haven't done a podcast in like 2 years, but, you know, um, I go by spirit. So I find that when I jump in and jump out, there's things to be done. And when I jump in, there's new people to connect to and to understand. So with that, I want to thank you again, and I want to welcome you. I want to thank you for joining me. And I want to build a little bit on Ezekiel's vision. Um, this is an important one. If you check out, I started a group recently, like maybe just 2 strongs ago. It's very new. It's not even too many people in it. On Facebook, it's called the ANU Life Global Village. I urge you all to join it and participate in it. But I did a post today speaking about the wills of Ezekiel, and different meanings for them. Not just necessarily the usual ancient astronaut sort of theories, which I am in complete alignment with. You only have to watch who are the sky people to know that. But I kind of gave some other perspectives as well, which I'm going to give today. But let's start with Ezekiel. Like I said, when you're studying anything in ancient law, always study who's speaking, what's going on at that time, and who's being spoken to. So let's start with Ezekiel. Ezekiel was a priest, and Ezekiel was also a prophet, and he was active during what I would say was probably one of the most traumatic periods in Israel's history, Yisrael's history, and that was the Babylonian exile. And the thing about it is that he lived around like 6th century BCE, and he would be considered among like one of the elite of Jerusalem. He would be considered among the elite Yeru City Salim peace. Jerusalem. We sometimes say Jerusalem today, but anyway, so he would be a one of the elite ones who were taken captive to Babylon after that first wave of exiles around like 597 BCE. Um, and I think Ezekiel's story is always a very important one because it mirrors much of what those of us who identify with the Kibbalan, what we have gone through in terms of the elite being taken from a certain place. There's always this idea that, if you watch the movies, like, oh, they took all these old men and stuff. If they took an old man from amongst the Hebrews in West Africa, it was because that old man had deep knowledge and information. You're not going to go and get a 50, 60-year-old man to come pick cotton, but there's so many wills within wills, secrets within secrets, lies within lies. But speaking about Ezekiel, because that could be another segment. He was from the tribe of Levi, and he was trained to serve the temple of Jerusalem. So we know he had, of course, Levitical training, and then at some point he was called to be a prophet. This would be he was probably around 30 or so, but he received the calling, a prophetic calling, we'll say, while he was in exile. And again, that was around the age of 30. And that's a very important point. Like when I talk about the mirroring that we speak about, sometimes we feel like until we set things a certain way or get things a certain way that we can't get started on our purpose. We can't do what we were called, but that's never been the truth. We'll get into that. But, he was called by the river Shabar, and the river Shabar, Chebar. That's a river in Babylon. And he saw visions of Shemaim and, or what some of you may call heaven, or what some of you may call the fifth dimension, or what some of you may call the Duat, or what some of you may call ANU, or Uranus, or Anus. But he saw visions. And one of the things that he saw, like one of the famous visions, was the will within the will. And this kind of marked, if you look at Ezekiel 1, but this kind of marked the beginning of what we will call his divine commission. Like from here now, everything sets off, everything sets forward. So, his role was, or we look at his mission, his role was to warn, his role was to rebuke, and ultimately his restore was his job or his role was to restore faith, within the exiled Israelites. Very important because, again, a lot of people, when they're looking for a prophetic word, they're looking for something that soothes them and not a truth that will heal them. So if you notice, like his prophecies were primarily focused around judgment. They were focused around repentance and the promises of restoration and a new covenant. Now, all of these things don't necessarily come with like a smooth, cool breeze, as many would like them to. A lot of times people are sort of in this space where, like I said, they're used to their spiritual teachers or the spiritual leaders soothing them and pacifying them and telling them what they want to hear. They have a very sort of trick sort of mindset. And when I say trick, it's like I'm gonna pay you to make me feel good. I'm gonna show up. I'm gonna come to the church. I'm gonna give my offering or to the mosque or to your social media channel. I'm gonna subscribe to your Patreon. I'm gonna pay for me to feel good. And as soon as you stop making me feel good, I'm gonna stop paying. you know, and it's a real trick kind of mindset. But Ezekiel operated outside of the temple. So what that meant was that he operated outside of what we would consider to be comfort, and he was in enemy territory. So it's not like he was in this temple amongst, his people on safe land, on his homeland, and he's good to go. He was behind enemy lines, but he was still able to stay connected to divine vision. That's so critical. A lot of times we sort of put ourselves in this place again where we get so distracted and pulled from left to right, and we forget that we can be in exile and we can still be aligned. Being exiled or being on enemy territory or in an uncomfortable space doesn't mean that we still don't have the opportunity to be a vessel. It doesn't mean that we still don't have opportunity to receive what I would call higher insight, or to receive higher revelation. It still exists regardless of the space or the spacing that you may find yourself in, right? So, you know, bringing it to the ANU way, and again, I wanted to give a little background on Ezekiel, so we understand the person who's having the vision instead of just jumping in like Ezekiel had a vision, will within the will. Like, okay, so who was that? Who's Ezekiel? But in the ANU way, one of the things that we do emphasize is the power of vision. There's a whole section on vision, and in particular, vision and hardship. So similar to Ezekiel, we'll find that we are also people who are in transition. We haven't arrived. If you tuned into where we really are as a people and what's really going on, you'll understand that, yeah, man, we're still far from home, and we're still being guided, some of us, by sacred vision and holding on and holding fast to that vision, still being guided by a divine order and the call to rebuild spiritually, right? So again, very similar to Ezekiel in that sense. All right, so let's get to, we can talk about his vision a little bit. So Ezekiel saw a will, and he saw a will within a will, and it was glowing, and it was alive, and it was intelligent, and it didn't move around randomly, but it moved by the ruach, or the spirit, as some of you may say. It moved by the spirit. It's really important that you understand that. It wasn't just like something flopping, in the wind like a balloon, or well, I guess a kite can have a deliberate sort of path, but it was moving by spirit. And this is pretty much echoed, I would say, directly in Message to the Black Man, which really helped to spark, some of what I wanted to share today. But when you read Message to the Black Man, with Elijah Muhammad, which is a collection of his gems, it says that it talks about the mother plane, and it says that the mother plane was made for the purposes of destroying the present world and the world of the enemies of Allah. This was the purpose of the construction, we will say, of the mother plane. And there are small circular planes called baby planes. And these are small circular planes that, they're seen from time to time. And, they have different words that people may say, like UFOs or UAPs, or, they used to call them spirits back in the days before they started using the term UFO. They were called spirits, but these would be like the smaller scout ships that come back and forth or to and fro the mother plane, which is like the size. Well, you can read it yourself too, but the size of like two battleships. So over a mile, long. This mother plane we're speaking about. So this is not like a little small ship or something that anything that man-made society or man-made technology can, well, earthly man-made technology can do anything about. So now there's a physical mother plane. I want to be very clear on that as far as where the stance of ANU is. There is a physical mother plane. There are physical ships. There are physical people who live in what we would call the sky or the upper atmosphere that are called gods and angels and all kind of different stuff. But um, with that, the mother plane is not just physical, but it's also symbolic. Like I always say, go to the concrete then the abstract, but you got to know them both, right? So the mother plane is symbolic of divine. It's a divine system of judgment, of spiritual surveillance, and of a movement of a divine appointed time, I would say. Um, when we look at Ezekiel's will, we see that the will is still manifesting in this age. So sometimes we may look at somebody or read some of these scriptures and whatnot, and we say, man, that was something back then, or they were seeing this back then or seeing that back then, and not realize that these things are still happening. These things are still very present. Now, if you're someone who follows the words of NASA or different meteorologists, you'll know, or even just the government, that there is so much talk now around sightings, and we just had these drone incidents that no one's talking about anymore. But well, they were calling them drones, and you didn't really know what they were, but they were finding in New York and New Jersey, and I think in Pennsylvania as well. Um, and we just look at it like it's random, but it's not random. If you read Ezekiel 1 and 20, wherever the spirit was to go, they went thither, was their spirit to go, and the wills were lifted up over against them, right? For the spirit of the living creature was in the wills. So that tells you right there, like, okay, there was intelligence inside of the wills within the wills, or the craft, right? And wherever the spirit went, the creatures would go. So it wasn't, like I said, just like this random sort of floating and oscillating in the sky, but this is technology that we're speaking about. So there's obviously a timing that's needed, um, in our culture and in our community of ANU. We understand that timing is not convenience. It's a covenant. We don't guess when we should act. We listen and then we obey. So it's similar to the will. We move when the spirit moves. So it's a covenant relationship that's being displayed just in our very movements, because we're trusting the Ruach. We're having faith in that. And similar to Ezekiel's will and Ezekiel's vision, like it said, because remember, there's never anything that's said in any ancient scripture, whatever book you're reading, there's no fluff. If it's a good time held book, every word is there for a reason, even in mistranslation, especially when it's mistranslated, right? So even when we look at the words of the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, he emphasized the teachings that the original man must align with divine law, right? So that's an example of, where the spirit goes, I'll go, or where it urges and nudges, I move. One of the things that he said in Message to the Black Man was, the black man must rise and return to his own God, and his own civilization. He said there's no God who will guide you except your own. I think it's very significant. Many people will say, "Oh man, there's only one God. There's only one." That's no. Even Torah tells you will have no other gods before me. That means there's other gods. Just don't put them before me. You know. Um, so Elijah Muhammad, in Message to the Black Man, is saying that, you know, you will only be rightly guided by your Yah or your El or your Elohim or your God, you know, and that was in the, I think the section of Black Man Must Rise, you know. So you start to get the sense of like your timing is not necessarily universal. You know, your timing is related to your divinity. Your timing is related to your creator. Your timing is related to willfully your maker. And as I've shared many times before, you know, like your creator and your maker are not always one and the same, which can be pretty sad depending on where you derive from. You know, you may come from a good creator and have a bad maker, you know, or you may come from a bad maker but have a bad creator but have a good maker, you know, and you redeem your destiny, you know. But let's look at like terms like wheresoever the spirit was to go, they went. That alone represents the alignment of the will. And when I say will, WILL, right? I know sometimes I don't say the nuanced pronunciations for certain words. So will, WILL. So the representation of the alignment of the WILL with divine direction, you know, the they, and if we're contextually speaking in that scripture, is speaking about the living creatures, right? And the living creatures are symbolic, or they could be considered symbolic of divine forces, you know, aspects of the soul or messengers of higher consciousness, you know, and these are these are being driven, you know, in a certain way. So when the spirit moved or when the Ruach moved, they didn't hesitate. You see, they didn't hesitate. The Ruach said, go this way. They went that way. Go back. They went back. Because you notice one of the things he said is that they moved every which way. So they didn't hesitate. They didn't question. They moved with it. You know, that's something that I can say as a man, as a father, you know, that I find very irksome. You know, if I give a directive to my family and it's a pause and it's a, well, did you think maybe we could do it? It's like, this isn't, you know, in that moment, like, this ain't my family. You know, this ain't my family. You know, because there's a calibration that we're supposed to have. You know, and when the spirit, when the ruach, when the wisdom says, boom, the authority, then everybody shifts. You know, so and I knew there's metaphysical principles, or if we look at the metaphysics, that's the principle of harmonizing the power of the lower self to the higher self. Um, you could term it as even Elohimic impulse. You know, so when you walk in divine timing, you know, you first have to tune into divine motion to even be locked into divine timing. You know, you don't lock into your emotional reactions or the conditioning that the world would provide. There's always worldly conditioning. There's always emotional reactions. And some people are so calibrated to that they can never lock into divine motion and therefore never lock into divine timing. You know, so that's the very first thing that you want to strive towards is harmonizing the power of the lower self with the power, you know, of the higher self. Um, the scripture also speaks about thither was their spirit to go. Thither was their spirit to go. And again, you know, when you're looking at these things, you want to, like I said, every word is there is very intentional. There's no word that's put there by mistake. So when you read thither was their spirit to go, that's the soul, or more specifically the spirit, being in full agreement with divine intention. There's no inner conflicts. Um, there's no inner resistance that expresses itself as external resistance. That line right there, it points to the oneness between the divine spirit and the spirit, or the spiritual direction, right? You know, the direction of the spirit and divine intention are one. There's no resistance. It's not just that the body, um, it's not just that the body is moving, but the inner will is following, you see. And once the inner will follows the divine intention, then everything around you begins to manifest towards that intention. Sometimes we do things begrudgingly and we're just like, all right, well, I did this, I did that. We're putting forth effort, you know, there's no force there, or we're putting force, but there's no effort. So therefore it doesn't equate to work. There's no progress, So we're like, well, I did what God told me. I did that. And then we're trying to figure out why, or maybe not even trying to figure it out. Why haven't things worked out for me? In the ANU way, there's the principle of inner consent. And that's the alignment of your thoughts and the alignment of your feelings and with, or I would say, and the purpose with the divine will. So you're aligning all of those internal communities within you, your feelings, your thoughts, your purpose, and it's all aligned with the divine move. So your feet, they're not moving because they should move. Your spirit and your soul is in motion too. So you're in lockstep, mind, body, and spirit. And that's important because that's when you start getting beyond the letter of the law, but you're representing the spirit of the law. There's an internal impulse that is aligned with divine will. There's another part in there where it says, and the wills were lifted up against, the wills were lifted up over against them. Excuse me. The wills were lifted up over against them. And if we look at that, I guess esoterically, and always remember, you can interpret however you interpret. I'm just sharing, my own. Um, I would say that that's a suggestion that there's elevation that comes through alignment. If you look at the wills, and again, we're speaking about a physical thing here, right? But I'm also giving a symbolic representation, but that's symbolic of the divine mechanics. That's symbolic of cycles in our lives. That's symbolic, or it could be considered symbolic of systems in our lives. And even I would say celestial bodies in our lives. That's all symbolic of those, because they're all lifted when and because of spiritual movement. You see, so um, you have all these different components, and when you understand that, or when you learn it, it teaches us that when um, we're in alignment with our systems, and businesses have systems, or your business might be a system. Uh, your family could be a system. Your finances, your body, they are they're all supported and they are empowered. You know, these different things. Your families, your businesses, your body. But when your systems are sort of lifted and they're sort of supported and they're empowered, it lets you know that the will is now acting as an archetype of ascension. You know, um, there's forward motion, there's progress, and there's divine timing. It's not autonomous, but it's responsive to spirit. And I know for many, that's like, that's one of the most offensive things you can say, because we live in such a rebellious time. People would look at you like you're crazy if you're like, yeah, I'm listening to spirit, or I'm, I'm responding to spirit. I'm in alignment with spirit. People, if I say I'm in alignment with my spirit, or I'm listening to my spirit, I'm getting quiet and listening to me. It's fine. It's perfectly cool. That's what you got to do sometimes. Because all the answers are within. You got to listen to yourself. But if I say, nah, like my movements are not autonomous. I am completely guided by higher spirit, and I've aligned myself as the lower being to the higher being. then it's just like, boy, here we go. But when you look at the other line, for the creature, for the spirit of the living creature was in the wills. And again, WHEELS. I know I may be saying wheel and will the same way, or it may sound similar, just the way I speak. To me, that's a key part of that passage, because the spirit is inside of the system. That's what it's saying. The spirit is in the system. The divine originator is embedded inside of the mechanisms of time, the mechanisms of law, the mechanisms of nature and movement. So the will doesn't contain the spirit. The will is animated. Will, WHEEL. The will is animated or brought to life by the spirit, you see. And I think that's to me, that's like one of the most key pieces there, who and what is animating you, or what spirit, in ANU teachings, we kind of deal with the idea that, the blueprint of divine intelligence is inside every cycle, right? The blueprint of divine intelligence is within your breath. The blueprint of divine intelligence is within your healthy growth. The blueprint of divine intelligence is even inside of your challenges. You see, and I am using the word challenge as opposed to the word problem purposely. So the will, or the mother plane, it's not just a tool, if you will. It's a living principle. And that's a very important concept, because it's moving with the very essence of the divine. It's moving with the very essence of the originator. It's moving with the very essence of the creator. I'm going to use these different terms that, you may be used to. The very essence of Yahuwah, the very essence of your God. These are important sort of ideas to sit on, and to think about. I would say this verse is it's a spiritual manual. If you've not checked out, like the story of Ezekiel and the vision of Ezekiel, man, I would definitely encourage you to do so. Definitely check it out so you can get notifications. It's a manual for divine motion, and it teaches us to surrender, but not only surrender through, that through surrender to divine intelligence can we experience elevation, it's the going up, and we can experience harmony, that's the wills working with each other, but we can also experience a new effectiveness. A lot of us, we just are not as effective as we would like to be. When your inner self is aligned, the systems of your life, they begin to lift and they begin to move, and all of this happens with a sort of a supernatural grace. I would say it starts to happen, and for some looking from the outside, man, you start making it look easy, and sometimes that's when envy, when envy will start to come through. When it starts to look too easy for people, but that supernatural grace is important, and sometimes that happens too, like that envy, because there's many of us, all of us, who struggle with that feeling of being behind or feeling like you're behind, but sometimes you may not realize that you're not actually late, but you are simply just in preparation. And there's a season for everything. I did a whole segment years ago. I was like 2020, 2019, breaking that down, like knowing when it is your season, man. And when you're locked into divine timing, it's not so difficult. Elijah Muhammad, he spoke about Allah, does not come in vain or without a purpose. So all of his work is done in a set time and at the right time. You know, that's an important concept, man. You know, sometimes people just don't listen, man. They ignore things that they should be paying attention to. You know, they take things for granted. They take moments for granted. They take experience for granted, you know, and sometimes their brain is so locked into pattern. It's like, oh, it'll come around again, you know, or when it does come around, they ignore it. They don't treat it as serious as they should, without realizing that if there's a certain thing that's coming around, it's coming around in Allah's time or in Yah's time. Allah and Yah are not the same, by the way. So I'm not using those terms interchangeably. Um, when we look at Ezekiel's vision, you know, the creatures didn't move until the spirit did. The wills did the same exact thing. They followed suit. And the same should apply to our trod or our journey through life. You know, that's a great sign of spiritual intelligence. And you see, or you can witness that spiritual intelligence in the mother plane, you know, that Elijah Muhammad described. You know, one of the things that I remember he said was that the mother plane was created before its time of use. You know, I think a excellent statement. You know, like I said, sometimes we don't know when we're in preparation. You know, we're like, oh man, why this didn't happen, or why isn't this happening or that happening? You know, there's an appointed hour, and we are created, us, me, you know, for an appointed hour. You know, and we may jump off the porch and say, now, it's happening now. And it's like, maybe you're still in preparation. Maybe you're still being made. Maybe you're still being born, you know, for that actual moment of what you were made for. I remember he said it's only the time that is between you and the destruction of the present world. That was in a time of judgment. You know, that was a time of judgment. So, excuse me, I should have turned off noise. I'm a little rusty. I haven't done a segment, I think, in a month or change. So I'm used to like how to turn my stuff off and do not disturb and all of that before I get started. But, you know, it's something that I would urge you all, you know, think about, or even journal. I always urge you to journal. You know, where are you forcing movement outside of divine order in your life? You know, and where are you being called to wait or to observe? You know, how are you preparing to rise? You know, like the will and the spirit's appointed time. You know, um, that's something that I would, maybe you could feel free to share it in the comments. You know, we could chop it up on that. But before you do, think about it and, you know, kind of reflect and say to yourself, like, I am moving with divine timing. You know, I'm not behind. Um, I'm aligned. You know, and see how that feels. See how that sizzles in your spirit. You know, but see how that feels when you say that. If it feels like, yeah, man, I really am living in divine timing. If it feels authentic, or if it's like, I don't know. You know, in fact, I'll give you a little homework. Um, and I'll give you something with the objective to develop conscious awareness of divine movement in your life, and sort of to train your spirit to align with divine movement through observation, through writing or journaling, or slash and stillness. So I would say for this strong, you know, because I won't take so long before I return again. Even though next strong will be welcoming in a new member to ANU. We always do that at the end of the month, you know, for those who have gone through orientation and stuff. But anyway, so in the dawning, before you begin your day, I want you to quietly just ask yourself, where is the spirit moving today? Where is the spirit moving today? Wait for a moment, listen, you know, and take a moment to write down any impressions any feelings or any guidance that comes. It will probably be subtle, right? So you don't want to force it. You're like, come on, tell me something. Like chill out, relax. It'll come. And record even the small nudges that come, even if it's like a little quiet word. Like write that down. And then you want to do like a audit of your own timing. Do this like 2 or 3 times this coming strong. Reflect on. You want to do I'm gonna give you a reflection, and then you could journal it. One of the things you want to ask yourself is, where have I moved ahead of divine timing? Where have I moved ahead of divine timing? Also ask yourself, where have I resisted movement when I should have stepped forward? In what ways do I need to realign with divine timing, in my work, in my relationships, or even in my spiritual life? Then I would say at least one time this coming strong, set aside about 15 to 30 minutes and practice stillness, as obedience. So you're not meditating per se. You're not meditating for world peace or to solve world hunger or anything like that. You're just submitting yourself to divine timing. So you have no agenda. So just my bags. So I got the notification. Sit without any agenda. Um, Breathe deeply, right? Write down what you've experienced, or write down what you've learned after you have done that. So I would say, let that be your practice. This strong. So before I conclude, I would just or I'd be curious, like, what did you learn about divine timing this strong? You know, do you feel more aligned with the originator and spirit as you practice listening? And still, this is what I want you to ask yourself when you're done. So maybe when we meet again, on Sabbath, on seventh day, ask yourself that. Ask yourself, what will I continue to practice to stay in the flow of the will? WHEEL, right? And I affirm that the great architect, the great originator, the creator, the divine timekeeper, the source of all rhythm, that you surrender your clock to it, and that you only move when the creator moves, that you stop when the creator stops. I affirm that the will of the divine plan carries you into your purpose, carries you into promise, and carries you into peace, and willfully you ride the wheel of divine order, and that your life align with the rhythm of the Most High, that you be as the mother plane is. And the mother plane is prepared. The mother plane is positioned. The mother plane is prophetic, and most importantly, that you live the ANU way, that you live as a sovereign, that you live as a sacred being, and you live synced to divine time. That is my ultimate affirmation and will for you. All right. So I just wanted to close out with that, and willfully you learned something about Ezekiel's will and WHEEL, as well as your own will and the divine will, WILL, and you can spark a deeper study Like I said, feel free to join the Facebook group. ANU Life Global Village is the name. ANU Life Global Village. Um, and you can share your thoughts even on this segment in it as well. And I've been putting up some posts. Like I've been consistent with that. I've been consistent since I started the group. I've been putting up a pretty like, yeah, I think it's been every day. I've put a post up. Not just like a short, like, good morning, everyone, enjoy your day. Not like, I mean, I've been putting some information, you know, so it could be another source of learning for you as well. I mean, that's the whole point, and also for you to connect as well, connect, stay connected. We live in a time right now, man, and that's a whole nother segment I won't get into, but people think they have a luxury right now that they really don't have, even luxuries towards materialism. Like, this is not the time. This is not the time, you know, uh, to be looking online for your next big purchase, unless that big purchase is land that you're paying cash for. Like, this is not the time. Things are really coming to a head in a serious way. And I've been speaking about it for a while, and you're witnessing it. You're seeing different apocalypse, whether it be the DEI stuff or the closures, and man, it's on. It's on and popping, man. So now is the time that you squad up into cells, find out who lives near you. You start really working on these plans. I have some works coming forth on that as well, in regards to the survival piece and the economic piece and stuff like that. I've been really woodshedding and, really just listening to what's needed uh, right now. And that means that some projects have been put to the side, like Most High is like, not now. And then some have come forward that, like, yeah, now, do this now. Like, even getting back on Facebook. I left Facebook, I don't know, what, 2013, 12, something like that. Yeah, I thought I'd never be messing with a dog on Facebook again, but I do what I'm told. All right. But thank you for tuning in. We're getting ready to have what already started our new study group for internal. And again, anyone interested in joining ANU, make sure you head over to anulifeglobal.org. It's always in the video, right there. Hit the join button and start the process of applying. If you want to get a head start on it, you can always go to the SaduluHouse.com. My tongue is getting heavy now. SADULUHOUSE.com. And you'll see the ABC classes, which are the ANU basic classes. We switch things up a little bit in that before you can even be accepted, and you have to go through those classes first. You have to pass those classes first. They're not terribly difficult, but they do require your focus, and they do require your commitment. And even if you decide after, well, I ain't joining ANU, well, you still learn some stuff anyway. So nah. You're gonna learn something today, right? So you can always get a head start by just going and starting the classes, or you could do both at the same time. Start your application and start the classes, so you're already in the pipeline. All right. So thank you so much. I'm Chief Yuya. For those, I don't think I introduced myself. My bad. So if you watch to the end, the bonus content is my introduction. I'm Chief Yuya. For those of you who are new to this space or haven't been here in a long time and forgot, well, this guy looks kind of familiar. It's Chief Yuya. Yuya-san, I knew. I want to thank you for coming through and for spending this time. And I will that you have a safe, beautiful, and productive day. And catch me over on the Facebook group, ANU Life Global Village. All right.